Hello. Hello, welcome to Miss Peepers Reading Corner. I'm Katrina, aka Miss Peepers. Let's talk about books. Today is almost the end of March, and so we're close enough at the time of filming that I'm just calling it. I'm probably not going to finish another book before the month ends, and that's okay. So let's do our March wrap up and a very mini TBR for April. Before I start, as always, do not compare your reading to anybody else's. If you read one book in March, if you read one page in March, that's awesome. Reading is winning. Reading is winning. That is our mantra here. This past month I read 5 books, and since my goal is 85, I'm still on schedule, teensy bit ahead, just because I had some pretty big reading months in January and February, amazingly. And as always, I'll do my best to call out content warnings, but please, please, please look after yourself. If there are any topics that you prefer to avoid for any reason, there is zero shame here in that. We promote good mental health on this channel, so always look out for yourself. That seems a weird segue to go into a Stephen King novel, but here we are. I did read this chonker, 11/22/63, this month. This book follows Jake Epping, who is a high school English teacher in a very small town. One day he's approached by Al, the owner of the diner that he frequents in his town, and Al tells him that there is a portal to the past in the diner, and that he has been trying to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy. His idea is that this will make the world a better place, all the things that Kennedy was not able to do because his presidency was cut short. However, Al has spent too much time in the past. He has aged significantly, he has cancer, he is dying, and so he asks Jake to take on this task for him. It's definitely an interesting concept, and despite the way I summarize this, Jake does take some convincing. There's a bit of back and forth before he agrees to take this on. Jake learns very quickly when he gets to the past, which is the late 1950s, about, I think, 5 years before the assassination. He learns that the past does not want to be changed. So the closer he gets to the event that he is trying to change, the harder it is for him to move forward. This book is heavy. I'm switching sides. This is about, what, 850-ish pages? Yeah. I did enjoy this. I do, just in terms of content warnings, I think Stephen King just generally comes with a content warning that he does have a lot of violence in his books. There tends to be racism and misogyny. He's not great at representation. I think he's acknowledged that he's aware of that, so that's something, I guess, but that's just something to be aware of when you go into a Stephen King novel. For this book in particular, because it is set in the 1950s, late 50s, early 60s, King does take that opportunity to really describe in detail, in some cases, how unwelcoming that time period was for basically anyone who's not a white man like our protagonist. Now, to his credit, Jake does notice these things. It affects him pretty deeply when he experiences it firsthand. I think there's a big difference between knowing about injustice and seeing it happen. And I will say that King did a good job, I think, of portraying this in Jake. But King also does like to drop the N-word. He does like to drop racial slurs when he has an opportunity. I'm not going to get into whether King himself is racist. I don't have enough information personally to make a call on that, but I think that's an important thing to note in a book like this, that that's in there, and it is perfectly reasonable to choose not to read a book that has that in there. All of that said, though, I do think this was really imaginative and well written. I think it was probably about 100 to 150 pages longer than it needed to be. There is a romantic subplot in here because Jake lives in the past for quite a significant amount of time. He makes a life there. He meets a woman, he falls in love, and I think there are plot reasons for this, and I don't want to get into spoilers, but that's, to me, part of the problem with the romantic element. It feels like, to me, it felt like this woman only existed so that Jake would have a reason to take some of the actions that he does. And I didn't love that. The ending, which I won't spoil, the ending was not as satisfying to me as I wanted it to be. I understand why the book ended the way it did, but it felt a little bit anticlimactic to me. And I'm curious if you've read this, if you had a similar experience, or if maybe you really love the ending. I'm curious. For a book that is this long, to get all the way through and then be like, okay. That was disappointing. So while I liked this book, I did not love it. If it sounds of interest to you, I'm not going to discourage anyone from reading it. I think that's all I've got to say about that. A decent book, not a favorite, not hated. Right there in the middle somewhere. I did love this book though. I read Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim by Robert C. O'Brien. This is a middle grade novel about a mouse named Mrs. Frisbee whose son is sick, and she finds herself at the end of the winter season needing to move her home, her children, away from the farmer's garden. And she can't, because if she moves her son, then he's going to get worse and he may not be able to survive the move. And so, but Mrs. Frisbee is nothing if not resourceful, and she follows a path that leads her to a colony of rats who also live in the same garden, who agree to help her. And these rats, NIM stands for National Institute of Mental Health, for mental health, one of those prepositions. And the rats are escapees from a lab at NIM that has been trying to create intelligence, a human level intelligence in these rats. And it was successful. And so the rats help Mrs. Frisbee. This is a really sweet and beautiful story. As far as content warnings though, I mean, it does describe experimentation on animals. So we do get scenes from the laboratory where the rats were captured and then eventually escaped from. It's not as graphic as it could have been, but it's still upsetting in parts. The main characters in this book are all animals, and I'm gonna just tell you, it's a spoiler, but here it is. Some of them die. Won't tell you which ones, but that's upsetting. Anyway, this book is delightful. The characters in here, Mrs. Frisbee is such a great protagonist to follow around. And although you know it's a children's book and therefore is probably not going to end in devastation for everybody, there are still a lot of scenes of tension and you don't quite know what's going to happen. So I recommend this, even if you're an adult, even if you don't have children. Like me, I don't have children, I'm an adult. The other 3 books I read on my e-reader, so I will put covers up here so you can see them. First was Boy of Chaotic Making by Charlie N. Holmberg. This is the 3rd book in the Wimbrel House series, which I mentioned in a previous wrap-up when I read the 2nd book. I'll just discuss the series as a whole, because of course the further you get into a series, the more spoiler pitfalls there are. But this is a delightful historical fantasy set in the 1800s. The premise is that there are people who have magical abilities, who are essentially wizards, if you will, or sorcerers, and they get their magical abilities genetically, so it's passed down through families. And of course, when people with magic marry and have children with people who do not have magic, that bloodline of magic gets, the magic within the children is diluted. And so this is something that is a portion of the series. It's not central to every single book, but the concept is that you inherit magic from your family line, and the type of magic that you inherit comes from your family line. I really like the way that Holmberg created a magic system that is very simple. You have schools of magic. There are, I think, 11 of them. You have spells from that, but there's not like a really strict breakdown of here are exactly the things you can do in each one, which gives her the flexibility to say, okay, well, here's something in this school of magic that would be good for this character to have, which would be helpful to the plot, which would be dramatic, whatever it is, and it fits in really nicely. This series follows Hulda Larkin and Merritt Fernsby. Hulda is an investigator of enchanted houses, and helps families with enchanted houses that have gone wrong in some way or perhaps are unwieldy. She helps them learn to live within these spaces. Merritt has inherited one of these houses, and Hulda is the person assigned to help him. Throughout these 3 novels, Hulda and Merritt form a very slow burn romance, which is just charming. They find themselves, again, I don't want to spoil too much, but they find themselves in the care of a child who has magical abilities, and that is part of the that is the focus of the 3rd book, is he is the boy of chaotic making. There's not a whole lot I can say about the 3rd book without spoiling the 1st and 2nd, and I'm really sorry about that. But this is a delightful series. I really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it. This series is very friendly to fantasy beginners, especially if you enjoy historical fiction. It throws that blend in there really nicely. Sylvie joins us to talk about the next book, The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. Now, I've seen a couple of booktubers talk about this one, so you may have heard about it recently. This is I think it's a young adult. I'd call it a young adult. It's about a teenager who doesn't have a whole lot of money. Her mother is dead and her father is out of the picture, so she's living with her older half-sister. And she learns that a billionaire has named her in his will. And this is very weird for her. She has no idea who this guy is, but the lawyers are insisting that she come to the reading of the will, which she does, and meets the family. He's got 4 grandsons, he's got 2 daughters, and this massive mansion. And in the reading of the will, it is declared that most of the money, with the exception of a very small percentage, and the house, the entire house, has been left to her. And of course the family's not happy about that. But the one requirement of this is that she live in the house for a year, and while the family doesn't have to stay there, she can't kick them out. So it's incredibly awkward. And then as she's getting to know this family, the grandsons tell her that their grandfather used to leave them like puzzles and give them ciphers and things like that to solve. And one of the grandsons in particular is very convinced that this is just another puzzle that they need to solve. And so, yeah, so she ends up in this world that she is completely unprepared for. I will say that it is very interesting, showing the dynamics between what she is accustomed to as someone who does not have a lot of money, suddenly having all of the money, like billions with a B. There's literally nothing she can't acquire if she wants to. But it also, because this becomes a sensational story, and so she suddenly has media attention. She has a bodyguard now that's been assigned to her. She has cars driving her to a fancy private school, and so it's just a very different sort of dynamic from what she is used to. And she also realizes that her prospects are entirely different now, because her initial plan was, she's very intelligent, she was planning to go to college, she was working towards a very practical degree so she could go out and immediately get a job and do well, and improve her financial situation. And now none of that is necessary. She can literally be whatever she wants, and she's never had to think that way before. She's never had an opportunity to think that way before. And so that dynamic I found really interesting. So how she interacts with these rich kids that are suddenly surrounding her, not just the grandchildren, but also the people in her new school. And so it's just a very it's a very interesting dynamic. I will say, Sylvie's done. She's like, we want to deal with weird billionaires doing weird stuff with their money. And so I will say, again, I won't spoil it, but the ending, I thought the ending was actually really, really well done, in that I didn't see it coming. And it kind of makes you go, what the actual, what? And so it's not what you would expect. And and I just found that highly interesting and entertaining. So I do recommend this. It is the beginning of a series. I don't know if a second book would be as strong as the first, but who knows? I mean, I feel like there's a point at which this would become repetitive, I would think, but I don't know for sure, not having read it. So I might pick up the second book at some point. If you have read further into the series, definitely let me know. Is it worth it to continue? And finally, the last book that I read in March. This one is a classic, a delightful one, a new classic, I don't know. Continuing on the YA, because that's just the vibe that I was feeling this month, I read The Princess Bride by William Goldman. Like many people my age, I'm a millennial. I grew up watching The Princess Bride over and over and over and over again because it's such a good movie. It's so much fun. It has a nostalgic place for me. And I know for a lot of people in my general age group. But I'd never read the book before for some reason. I have no idea why. I just never picked it up. So when it came across my e-reader, I was like, you know what? Let's give this a go. And I'm so glad that I read it. First of all, well, I'll tell you what it's about. In case you don't know, in case you've never seen the movie, in case you've never read the book, The Princess Bride is a fairy tale, and it is essentially, it's about a woman named Buttercup and a man named Wesley who fall in love, and then he leaves to go make his fortune because he doesn't have a whole lot of money. And because she is the most beautiful woman, or one of the most beautiful women in the entire world, she catches the eye of the prince who needs a wife. And so he says, okay, well, you're gonna marry me now. And she doesn't want to, but she also gets word around that time that Wesley has died at sea. And so in a pirate attack. And so she decides to close her heart forever because she feels like she can never love again. And so she agrees to marry this prince. So the structure of the film is of a grandfather reading this story to his grandson who is homesick and needs a distraction. And so you have interruptions periodically as the grandfather as the child is asking questions or jumping in saying, wait, this isn't right. This isn't how stories go, that kind of thing. And so they have little interludes throughout the movie. In the book, the author has commentary that he puts in italics where he is talking about how this is the story that his father read to him when he was sick. And so he is now writing it down and publishing it because it was this obscure novel by some guy named Morgenstern. And what's beautiful about this whole thing is that it's completely made up, that Morgenstern never existed. Sorry if I'm dashing your childhood dreams. Morgenstern never existed. Goldman creates this mythos around finding this book, editing it down, taking out the boring bits, and then publishing it under his own name as S. Morgenstern's Princess Bride. And he was so dedicated to this that in the introductions to various editions of this book, they're like anniversary editions and things like this, he doubles down on this story that this author existed. And he even gets into the estate of Morgenstern tried to sue him. He talks about a Morgenstern museum that the actor Andre the Giant, who was in the Princess Bride movie, told him about. Oh, you've got to go visit the Morgenstern Museum. So he has this story about how he takes this in the introduction, where you're supposed to hear like true things, right? Like in the introduction, he talks about taking his grandson to this museum, and that like it's this very, very complex storyline around someone who doesn't exist. He has an afterword after the book, after the story ends, talking about how the estate tried to sue him and all of this stuff because he stole this story. None of that is true, and it's delightful just how much the author sticks to this fantasy, and I'm here for it. I love it. It's great. If you're a fan of the movie, definitely read the book if you have not already. It hits all of those points and those things that you remember. Inconceivable. You killed my father, prepare to die, like all of that stuff around true love, and like just the whole thing. The movie is so true to the book, and they actually did not cut a whole lot from it. There wasn't much in the book that I noticed that was not familiar from the movie, which you don't get very often. Such a solid adaptation of just a really solid book. Content warnings for this one. There's quite a bit of fighting. There is quite a bit of death. There are some torture scenes. They're not super graphic, but they're in there, more so than the movie. But again, a similar sort of fairy tale type scene, as opposed to like a super gritty realistic. It's not that at all. So those are the books that I read in March. Now we're going to open our April mystery book. I will say that I am still reading my March mystery book, which was The Murder Room by P.D. James. I'm probably about halfway through it. I will finish it. I am enjoying it a lot. This month it just didn't happen, you know? That's how it's going to be. But we're going to open the April book and get started on it as soon as we finish the one from March. Okay. I've never heard of this book at all, so let's take a look. It is called Second Chance, and it is by Jane Green. I guess I should hold it up so you can actually see it. Second Chance by Jane Green. Based on the cover, I'm going to say this is a romance, but let's see. A life-affirming tale of friendship and fate. Jane Green once again shows why she is a nationally best-selling author with legions of loyal fans. Now I feel like I should know who she is, but I realize that this is marketing copy. It's fine. The story of a group of people who haven't seen each other since they were best friends in school. They reunite when one of them dies in a terrible tragedy. Recapturing the intimacy of their younger days, they are each surprised at the impact their encounter brings. Warm, witty, and as wise as ever, Second Chance will strike a chord with anyone who's still trying to figure life out. Well, I'm still trying to figure life out, so let's see. We'll see how this goes. I've never heard of this author, and I've never heard of this book. So this is the beautiful thing about the mystery books, is that you come across things you've never heard of. So excited about this. I will report back and let you know how it was. So that's all we've got. In March, I definitely experienced sort of an off and on again reading slump. I realize 5 books is still a very respectable number for a month. So I'm not in any way trying to say, I didn't read anything, but I definitely did not read as much or as often as I like to. So I'm not going to give myself a hard and fast plan for April, other than I will certainly give this book a try. I do still need to start reading Middlemarch. Haven't started that. I say need. It's a hobby. I still plan to start reading Middlemarch soon, and I actually want to do a reading vlog of that as well. So we'll get that started at some point, maybe this weekend. But let me know if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them. And I hope you're reading great books yourself, and I will see you in the next video. Y'all, does it get any cuter than this? Hello. Hello, Miss Sylvie. Miss Sylvie. Sitting behind me in my chair on a little stack of blankets, purring her heart out. You probably can't hear it. You probably can't hear it. But how cute. How cute. Yeah. Can you believe someone gave this little nugget up? Their loss was our gain. Yes, indeedy. Adopt a cat, y'all. But only if you feel that you can care for a cat. But look how cute she is. Yes. She was sitting behind me here for most of the time I was filming. Adorable.